I still remember the days when everything felt perfect. That early glow when you're still learning about each other, the thrill of building something together. Back then, my wife, Camilla, was my partner in crime, my sounding board, and my biggest supporter. We had dreams, big ones. I had always wanted to be successful in business, and she was right there beside me, encouraging me every step of the way. And we made it. At least, I did. Now, I'm the founder and CEO of a software company that's worth millions. I've worked my way up through grit and sleepless nights, through missed vacations and skipped family gatherings. But it paid off. We had a beautiful home, vacations to Europe whenever we felt like it, the whole package. Camilla enjoyed the fruits of that success too. She quit her job as a dental assistant and took on her new role as the lady of the house, a life of leisure. Yet lately, things have started to feel off. It started small. Camilla became distant. Her coldness began creeping in like an unnoticed draft in an otherwise warm room. She'd always been affectionate, someone who loved to sit close and touch, but that started to fade. She'd avoid eye contact, and when we did talk, our conversations were shorter, less meaningful, like she was always holding something back. Sometimes, she'd give me this hollow smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I tried to chalk it up to the inevitable wear and tear of a long relationship. Every marriage goes through rough patches, right? Or so I told myself. But then I started noticing the little things. She had always been transparent about her spending, but one day I saw a credit card statement lying on the kitchen counter, half hidden under a pile of mail. There were charges I couldn't explain. Dinner at restaurants she hadn't mentioned, jewelry stores I knew she'd never walked me into. There was also a transaction at a hotel, expensive, downtown, the kind of place you wouldn't go unless you were hiding something. I'm a logical man, not one to jump to conclusions. I told myself it was probably nothing. But the gut feeling persisted, gnawing at me, whispering that something was terribly wrong. So I started paying closer attention. I began tracking her movements, noticing when she was evasive about where she'd been. She'd say she was at lunch with a friend, but her hair would be done in a way she wouldn't bother with for just a casual outing. The lipstick, the heels. She wasn't dressing up for me. That much was clear. I remember the first time I felt that tight knot of suspicion clench in my chest. I had come home early from a meeting that had been canceled. As I parked the car, I noticed hers was already in the driveway. Odd, considering she was supposed to be out running errands. I stepped inside, and the house was eerily quiet. No sounds of her humming along to music, no pots clanging in the kitchen. Just stillness. I called her name. No response. When I finally found her upstairs in our bedroom, she jumped a little when she saw me. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone like it held some life-altering secret. When I asked her what she was doing, she mumbled something about checking messages from her mom. But I caught that look in her eyes, guilt or maybe fear. It was gone in a flash, replaced by that same cold, distant expression she'd been wearing lately. I didn't press it. Maybe I should have, but part of me wasn't ready to know what I feared deep down. It was easier to pretend that we were just going through a phase, that things would go back to the way they used to be if I worked harder, if I just gave her space, but things didn't get better. They got worse. Camilla started disappearing more often. There were too many late nights with vague explanations. Too many times she said she was with friends, but came home smelling like she'd bathed in a perfume I didn't recognize. When she wasn't out, she spent more time on her phone, her fingers typing furiously, her screen angled away from me. She'd smile, genuine, soft, but not at me. She was smiling at something or someone on that damn phone. I wanted to snatch it out of her hands, demand answers, but I bit my tongue. I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, and it was killing me. So I did what any paranoid husband would do. I started investigating. Quietly, at first. I would glance over her shoulder when she was on her phone, but she was always quick to flip the screen when she noticed me nearby. That only fueled my suspicion. I wanted to believe that it was all in my head, that the stress of work was making me paranoid, but deep down, I knew better. Her bank records were the first real red flag. After a particularly tense evening where Camila had been glued to her phone again, I logged into our joint account, something I hadn't done in ages. There were transfers, small at first, then larger sums to an account I didn't recognize. Payments for luxury goods and services, ones she had never mentioned. It felt like a punch to the gut. That's when I knew. Something was happening, something she wasn't telling me. The woman I had spent a decade of my life with was pulling away, lying, hiding. Something. But what? Or who? As the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore, and so did the growing pit of dread in my stomach. The truth was out there, waiting to be found, and I was damn sure I was going to uncover it. The tension between Camila and me kept building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I could feel the weight of it every time we were in the same room. There were times I thought about just sitting her down, looking her in the eyes, and asking her outright, "Are you cheating on me?" But I didn't. Part of me was afraid to hear the answer. The other part, the businessman in me, needed proof. I always believed in strategy, in planning your next move before the other person even knows they're playing. So I started doing what I do best, analyzing. Camila had become a puzzle I was determined to solve. The first step was surveillance. No, I didn't hire a private investigator or anything so dramatic. I simply paid closer attention. Her routine was predictable, but there were holes in her story. A few times she said she was going to yoga or meeting a friend for coffee, but when I checked her location through the tracking app on her phone, something we'd both installed years ago for safety, she wasn't where she said she'd be. Instead, she was in neighborhoods I wasn't familiar with, often by upscale restaurants or, worse, by hotels. The idea of her sitting across from another man, laughing and smiling like she used to with me, made my blood boil. But I kept cool. I knew if I was going to get answers, I had to be smart about it. My business instincts kicked in, and I started piecing together a timeline. I began noticing patterns, certain days of the week where her errands took longer than they should, or when she'd come home just a bit too late, making excuses about traffic or last-minute plans with friends. At night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her phone buzzing. Always, she'd quietly slip out of bed and tiptoe to the living room, her voice a soft murmur as she answered texts or calls that apparently couldn't wait until morning. It wasn't just her behavior either. It was her appearance. Camila had always been beautiful, always took pride in how she looked, but recently she'd started dressing differently, flashier, more revealing. It wasn't for me, I knew that much. She hardly acknowledged me anymore when she walked into the room, her eyes always focused on something or someone else. The clothes were new too, tight dresses, expensive heels, things she hadn't worn in years. She was trying to impress someone, and it damn sure wasn't me. I needed confirmation, something concrete. That's when I decided to follow her. One Friday afternoon, she told me she was meeting an old friend for lunch. Her voice had that same rehearsed, emotionless tone she'd been using for weeks. I played along, acting distracted by my phone, nodding in that half-interested way I'd perfected whenever she gave me her excuses. As soon as she left, I grabbed my jacket, got into my car, and tailed her. I kept a safe distance, making sure not to draw any attention. She drove across town to a place I didn't recognize, an upscale boutique hotel with a name I'd only seen in magazines. She parked in the back, like she was trying to be discreet, but nothing about it screamed, "lunch with a friend." My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her step out of the car, look around, and walk inside. I waited. 10 minutes, 15. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He strolled into the hotel casually, his movements smooth, like he had all the time in the world. A tall guy, probably around my age, but with that kind of self-assured air that comes with wealth and power. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his hair styled just right. He didn't even hesitate as he walked toward the entrance, as if he'd been there 100 times before, and that's when it hit me. This was no business lunch, no friend from college. Camilla was meeting this man, this stranger, for something far more intimate than any conversation over salad and cocktails. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them good. I felt sick, nauseous, like the world had tilted off its axis, and I was left standing on unstable ground. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face and gone behind my back? I waited there for over an hour, watching the entrance, expecting her to walk out any minute. But she didn't. I knew what was happening inside. The thought of it tore me apart. The woman I had loved for over a decade, the woman I had built a life with, was betraying me in the worst possible way. And I was just sitting there, helpless, watching it unfold. When she finally emerged, she didn't look guilty. There was no shame in her face, no remorse. She walked out with the same calm, composed demeanor she'd always had. I watched her drive away, and for a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there. But no, I needed more. I couldn't storm into this blind. If I was going to confront Camilla, I was going to do it right, with the kind of precision and strategy that had built my empire. So, I waited, and I planned. That night, Camilla acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me over dinner, made small talk about her lunch, and kissed me goodnight like she always did. But things had changed for me. I couldn't look at her the same way. There was a crack in the foundation, and I knew it was only going to widen. I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered documents, looked into our financials, and called my lawyer. This was no longer just about a suspicion. It was about protecting myself, my future, my assets. If Camilla thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just going to expose her betrayal. I was going to ruin her. The day I found out the truth, the concrete, undeniable truth, it felt like the air had been sucked from my lungs. Up until that point, part of me had held on to a shred of hope. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe Camilla was just bored, restless, or going through something she didn't want to burden me with. Maybe the man from the hotel was just a friend. But that was all wishful thinking, a coward's fantasy. I didn't want to be that coward anymore. After tailing Camilla to the hotel that first time, I knew I couldn't live in limbo. I needed answers, real answers, not the half-truths and lies she'd been feeding me for months. That's when I made a call to a private investigator. A real one this time. It was a small, discreet firm. They specialized in these kinds of cases, the dirty business of betrayal. The investigator, a guy named David, assured me he'd be thorough and discreet. He promised to leave no stone unturned. At that point, I wasn't sure if I wanted him to find something or if I was praying he wouldn't, but I needed closure, whatever that looked like. Days turned into a week. Every moment felt like it stretched into eternity. Camilla continued her charade, playing the role of a loving wife, coming home late with flimsy excuses about running errands or meeting with friends. It was all I could do to keep my composure, to smile, to act like nothing was wrong, even though my insides were screaming. Every time she touched me, every kiss goodnight, felt like a mockery. She must have thought I was an idiot. Finally, the call came. David's voice was cold, professional. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Hayes, I have what you're looking for. I think we should meet in person." The dread that had been simmering in my chest surged to the surface, but I kept my voice steady. When and where? We met in his office, a sterile place with bare walls and a desk covered in manila folders. He didn't say much, just handed me an envelope. Inside was a series of photographs, some grainy, others crystal clear. But they all told the same story, Camilla, my wife, with him, the man from the hotel. They were in his car, at restaurants, walking hand in hand down the street. In one photo, she was pressed up against him in a parking lot, her lips on his as his hands roamed freely over her body. My stomach lurched as I stared at it, the betrayal in vivid color captured on film. "His name is Ryan Brooks," David said, interrupting my thoughts. "He's a wealthy hedge fund manager. Recently divorced, no kids. He and your wife have been seeing each other for about 6 months, as far as we can tell." 6 months. Half a year of lies. My hand tightened around the photos, the edges digging into my skin. "How often?" I asked, my voice strained. "Every week, sometimes more. It varies. They've met at different locations. Hotels, restaurants, even his place. She's been careful, but not careful enough." I nodded, though I felt like I was hearing everything from a distance, like the words were being spoken underwater. The details kept coming, but my mind was stuck on that number. 6 months. 6 months of sharing my bed, sharing my life while she was doing this behind my back. I clenched my fists, my knuckles turning white as I resisted the urge to crumple the photos in my hand. David cleared his throat. "There's more." I didn't think I could handle any more. My heart was already shattered, my mind racing through all the ways I'd been made a fool of, but I nodded for him to continue. "We dug into her financials, as you requested," he said, sliding another folder across the desk. "She's been siphoning money from your joint accounts. Slowly, in small increments over the last year. Looks like she's been planning something for a while." The betrayal felt like a dagger twisting deeper. Money. She wasn't just cheating on me emotionally or physically. She was planning her escape, her life after me. David gave me a sympathetic look, though I wasn't sure if it was genuine or just part of his job. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, I know this is a lot." I didn't respond. My mind was already spinning, thinking of everything I'd worked for, everything I had built, the house, the company, the life we had. And she was going to take a piece of it. No, more than a piece. She was setting herself up to walk away with everything. I stood, feeling like I needed to leave before the rage building inside of me exploded right there in David's office. "I need to think," I muttered, clutching the envelope tightly in my hand as I walked out. When I got home, Camilla was sitting at the dining room table, her legs casually crossed, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in, giving me a quick smile before going back to her screen. The sight of her sitting there so calm, so normal, made me sick. "Hey babe, how was your day?" she asked, her voice light and carefree. How was my day? How was my day? I wanted to throw the photos at her, scream, demand to know how she could do this to me. But instead, I played my part. I smiled, gave her some half-hearted answer about a long meeting, and walked upstairs to the bedroom. I dropped the envelope on the bed and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to rip the Band-Aid off and get it over with. But that wasn't my style. No, I wasn't going to rush into this blind. If I was going to confront Camilla, it was going to be on my terms, and with everything stacked in my favor. That night, as she lay beside me in bed, her body warm against mine, I made a decision. She thought she was smart. She thought she was going to get away with it, that she could keep seeing him, siphoning money, planning her escape. But what she didn't know was that I had already made my move. I was going to take everything from her, and she wouldn't even see it coming. Revenge, they say, is best served cold. Well, I was about to serve her a feast. The days that followed felt like an eerie calm before the storm. Camilla continued her charade of the devoted wife, laughing at my jokes during dinner, asking me about my day, all while I knew exactly what she had been up to. It took everything in me to hold back, to not just explode right there in the middle of the living room, but I kept my cool. I had to. If I confronted her now, I'd be doing it out of pure emotion, and that's how you lose. Instead, I played the game better than she ever could. I smiled when I had to, kissed her on the cheek before bed, even initiated sex once, just to keep the illusion alive. It disgusted me, but I knew it was necessary. I wasn't just planning an argument, I was planning her destruction. While Camilla was off with Ryan, doing God knows what in those fancy hotels, I was preparing my own moves. I called my lawyer, and we started drafting the divorce papers. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Everything needed to be perfect. I had to secure my assets, my company, and most importantly, my dignity. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this with half of everything I'd built. The lawyer was a shark, exactly what I needed. He assured me that we could not only protect the majority of my assets, but also gather more damning evidence against her to ensure she walked away with nothing. He told me to be patient, to let things play out a bit longer. The longer she thought she had the upper hand, the better it would be when the rug was pulled out from under her. And so, I waited. I collected evidence. Bank statements, financial records, even more photos of her and Ryan. Each one was another nail in the coffin. I watched her leave the house more and more, sometimes with a new outfit, sometimes with that extra touch of perfume that I knew wasn't for me. All the while, I smiled and nodded like the perfect, oblivious husband. Then came the day I was waiting for, the day I would confront her. I had planned it meticulously. Camilla was supposed to meet Ryan that afternoon at the hotel again. I had already instructed David, my investigator, to follow her one last time. But this time, I wasn't just going to wait at home. I was going to be there too. I showed up at the hotel about an hour after she did. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked through the lobby, up to the front desk. The receptionist gave me a polite smile, oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. I told her I was meeting my wife, Camilla Hayes, and without hesitation, she told me her room number, room 312. I thanked her, but the truth was, I had already known. When I reached the door, I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It wasn't locked, and the quiet hum of voices drifted through the crack. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and then pushed the door open. There she was. Camilla sat on the edge of the bed, wearing nothing but a robe, her legs crossed, a glass of champagne in hand. She froze when she saw me, her face instantly paling. Across from her, lounging casually in a chair, was Ryan. The same guy I'd seen in the photos, the man she had been sneaking off to meet for months. He didn't move at first, just stared at me, stunned, probably thinking this was some kind of nightmare. The room was painfully silent for a moment. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the rage building inside me like a tidal wave. But I kept calm. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "Enjoying yourselves?" I asked, my voice cold and even, as I stepped into the room. Camilla jumped to her feet, the robe slipping off her shoulder. "Logan, it's not what it looks like." I almost laughed at how ridiculous that line was. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think it is. Ryan finally stood, straightening his suit jacket like this was some business meeting he needed to walk out of. He was tall, imposing, but he didn't scare me. He was nothing more than an overconfident fool who thought he could waltz into my life and take what wasn't his. "Look, man," he said, raising his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "I didn't know—" I cut him off. "Don't bother. I know exactly who you are and what you've been doing with my wife." Camilla looked at me, her face a mix of fear and panic. "Logan, please. Let's talk about this. We can work through it." "Work through it?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've been cheating on me for 6 months, stealing money from our accounts, and planning to run off with him." I pointed a finger at Ryan, who shifted uncomfortably but didn't say anything. "There's no working through this, Camilla. This is over." Her eyes welled up with tears, but I wasn't buying it. She was only crying because she'd been caught, not because she actually regretted what she had done. "I was going to tell you," she said softly, like that somehow made it better. Tell me? I scoffed. You were going to tell me? When? After you drained our accounts and disappeared? She didn't respond, and for a moment I thought she was going to break down completely. But then, like the manipulative woman she was, she straightened up, her tears drying as quickly as they had appeared. I'm not the only one to blame here, Logan. You've been so focused on your business, on your work, that you haven't paid attention to us in years. This didn't just happen out of nowhere. There it was. The excuse. The classic justification for betrayal. As if this was somehow my fault, because I had been working to provide the life she had been so eager to enjoy. Don't you dare turn this around on me, I snapped, my voice growing colder. I gave you everything, Camilla, a life most people dream of, and you threw it away. For him. I glanced at Ryan, who was now looking for any way to escape this mess without getting his ass kicked. I took a step toward him, and he immediately raised his hands. Listen, I didn't want things to get messy, all right? This is between you two. You think you're walking out of this unscathed? I said, stepping closer until I was right in his face. You think you can just fuck another man's wife and walk away without consequence? Logan, please, Camilla pleaded, stepping between us. Just let him go. This is between us. I glared at her, and she shrank back under my gaze. Oh, don't worry. I'll deal with you in a minute. But right now, I want him to understand something. I turned my attention back to Ryan, who was now looking genuinely nervous. You've had your fun, but I promise you, this won't end well for either of you, and I'll make sure of it. I could see the fear in his eyes. Good. I wanted him to know that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Get the hell out of here, I finally said, stepping back, before I changed my mind. Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and practically bolted for the door, leaving Camilla standing there looking lost and broken. I turned to her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. You've ruined everything, I said quietly, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Everything we built, everything I thought we had, it's all gone. Tears started to roll down her cheeks again, but this time I didn't care. Let her cry. It was too late for that now. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice hard. You'll get nothing, not a single penny of what I've earned. And as for Ryan, good luck with that. He'll drop you the second this gets complicated. Her lip trembled, but she didn't argue. She knew it was over. With one last look at the woman who had betrayed me, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in the wreckage of our marriage. The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't feel any relief. Just the cold, heavy weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But at least now, the game was in my hands. The next morning, I woke up early, the events of the previous day still fresh in my mind. As I showered and dressed, the weight of what had happened pressed on me. Camilla had betrayed me in every way possible, but today was the day I would start reclaiming my life. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to be another pathetic husband who just took it and moved on quietly. Number I was going to make her pay. I left the house without a word to Camilla, who was still holed up in the bedroom, likely dreading what was to come. The legal documents were ready. My lawyer had assured me of that, but there was still more groundwork to be laid. I needed to make sure that every last detail was perfect. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a war. When I walked into my lawyer's office, Brian was already there, waiting. He was the best in the business, a pit bull in a suit, known for leaving his opponents in ruins. He smiled at me as I sat down across from him, his demeanor calm but calculating. I take it you're ready to move forward? Brian asked, his voice clipped and professional. He never wasted time with small talk, and that's exactly why I had hired him. More than ready? I replied, the words coming out with a sense of finality. I want her to have nothing, no house, no money, no assets. He leaned back in his chair, the smile never leaving his face. We'll make sure of that. I've reviewed everything, the finances, the evidence of infidelity, the money she's been siphoning off into her personal accounts. You're in a strong position, Logan. Camilla's not going to walk away from this without losing everything. Hearing those words brought a sense of cold satisfaction. I wasn't doing this out of pettiness or spite. No, this was about justice. She had taken what we built together and trampled all over it. She had turned her back on our marriage, our life, and me. This was simply the price she had to pay. Brian slid a thick stack of papers across the desk toward me. These are the divorce papers. We're going to file them today. Once they're filed, Camilla will be served with the papers, and she'll have no choice but to respond. In the meantime, we'll freeze any joint accounts and begin the process of asset division. I looked down at the papers, the weight of the moment hitting me. This was it. There was no going back. I'd already made up my mind, but still, the reality of ending a marriage, especially one that had lasted over a decade, felt heavy. But then, I remembered the photos, the lies, the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me lately. That was enough to harden my resolve. I signed the papers with a steady hand, each stroke of the pen feeling like I was signing the final chapter of our life together. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. I knew what was coming. Camilla, oblivious to the storm about to hit her, was in the kitchen, making herself a smoothie. She glanced at me when I walked in, offering a weak smile, but I didn't return it. The weight of what I had just done was pressing down on both of us, whether she realized it or not. I stood there for a moment, watching her move about the kitchen like it was any other day. Like she hadn't been sleeping with another man for months. Like she hadn't been siphoning money from our accounts, planning her escape. The sight of her acting so normal infuriated me. "Logan, I was thinking we could talk," she said, her voice careful, measured. "I know things have been difficult. Maybe we can go to therapy or something, try to work things out." I almost laughed. Therapy ? Now? After everything? She still thought she could manipulate her way out of this, that she could twist the situation into some shared responsibility. Like her cheating was somehow my fault. "There's nothing to talk about, Camilla," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I already filed for divorce this morning." Her eyes widened, the smoothie cup slipping from her hands and crashing to the floor, splattering green liquid everywhere. For a second, she just stared at me, her face frozen in shock. Then the tears came, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. "What? Logan, no, you can't. Please don't do this," she begged, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. It's done, Camilla. I filed the papers. You'll be served soon enough." I turned away from her, not wanting to see her face anymore, not wanting to hear her pathetic excuses. But she wasn't done. "Logan, please! You don't understand. I made a mistake. She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm, her voice trembling with desperation. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. Ryan, it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." I pulled my arm free, looking at her like I was seeing her for the first time. The lies were spilling out of her like poison, and I could see right through them. "Don't insult me, Camilla. You've been seeing him for 6 months. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice you made every time you met him, every time you lied to my face, every time you stole from me." She fell silent, her tears falling freely now, her lip quivering as she tried to find the right words. But there were no words that could undo what she had done. No amount of apologies could fix the betrayal. "I'll make sure you get nothing," I said, my voice low and hard. "You can have your affair, you can have your Ryan, but you'll leave with nothing." Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel any sympathy. This was the bed she had made, and now she was going to lie in it. "I don't want him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want us." I shook my head, the anger flaring up again. "There is no us, Camilla. There hasn't been for a long time." A week later, Camilla was served with the divorce papers. I wasn't home when it happened. I made sure of that. Brian called me to confirm that everything was moving forward as planned. The accounts were frozen, the assets secured, and the house, our house, was legally under my name alone. There was nothing left for her to take. Camilla tried to reach me several times, sending me texts and leaving voicemails, all begging me to talk, to reconsider. But I was done. I had given her the life she wanted, and she threw it away for some cheap thrill with a man who wouldn't even look at her twice now that things were falling apart. Ryan? He'd dropped her. The second things got serious. David had kept tabs on him for a while longer after the confrontation, and it was clear Ryan wasn't sticking around to play house with Camilla. She was on her own, with no man, no money, and no future. It was the first step in reclaiming my life. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt lighter. I didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to lie to myself about what was happening in my marriage. The weight of her betrayal still stung, but each day that passed, I felt a little bit stronger, a little more in control. I still had my company, I still had everything I had worked for, and now I had the freedom to start over. As I sat in my office overlooking the city, I thought about the future. The past was behind me now, buried with the ashes of my marriage, and in front of me was a wide, open road, full of possibilities. The scars of betrayal would heal, in time. And when they did, I knew I'd be stronger for it. But for Camilla, the nightmare was just beginning. The days after Camilla was served the divorce papers were a whirlwind of emotion, at least for her. For me, it was quiet, almost peaceful. The storm that had raged inside me for months was now gone, replaced with a cold certainty. I was free, or at least well on my way to being free, while Camilla's world was starting to crumble. She didn't take it well. I expected that, of course. She tried calling me, texting me, leaving voicemails full of desperate pleas. Each one sounded more frantic than the last. "Please, Logan, we can talk about this. Don't end things like this." That was one of the more reasonable messages. Others were downright pathetic. "I made a mistake, but I still love you. Ryan meant nothing." Ryan meant nothing. That line played over and over in my head every time I heard her voice. It was the same line every cheating spouse used when they were caught. It didn't mean anything. 6 months. 6 months of sneaking around, meeting him at hotels, while I worked late to keep our life, our future intact. That wasn't nothing. I stopped listening to her messages after a while. They all blended into one long, monotonous cry for help, but I wasn't her lifeline anymore. Let her swim in the mess she created. It didn't take long for the first real cracks in her facade to show. A few weeks after I filed, Camilla came home one evening to find that her access to our joint accounts had been shut off. Brian had been quick to freeze everything, making sure she couldn't siphon any more money into her secret stash. When she tried to use one of our credit cards to make a purchase, likely something frivolous and unnecessary, it was declined. I could only imagine her face when that happened. That evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at her phone, a glass of wine untouched in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes bloodshot, her face pale. There were bags under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. "Logan," she said quietly as I passed through the hallway. I didn't stop, but she followed me, her bare feet padding softly on the hardwood floor. I turned to face her, my expression neutral. "What?" She held up her phone, her hand trembling slightly. "I tried to use the card today and it was declined. The bank said the accounts are frozen. You can't just cut me off like this." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Actually, I can. The accounts are—" I turned to leave, but before I walked away, I glanced back at her. "You brought this on yourself, Camilla." She didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at the empty space in front of her, her life unraveling at her feet. Over the next few weeks, Camilla became a shadow of herself. The confident, put-together woman I had known for years was gone, replaced by someone who was barely holding it together. She had lost her lover, her money, and soon she'd lose her home, too. Her friends, most of them the superficial types who cared more about appearances than anything else, had distanced themselves from her as well. No one wanted to be associated with a woman whose life was imploding in such a spectacular fashion. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Brian was relentless as always. Camilla's attempts to fight for any portion of the house or assets were shot down by the mountain of evidence we had gathered. The affair, the financial theft, it all painted a clear picture of who she was and what she had done. In the end, she walked away with nothing. No house, no money, and certainly no sympathy. The judge had ruled in my favor, and all Camilla was left with were the consequences of her own choices. The day she left the house was quiet. She packed her things in the middle of the day while I was at work, not that there was much left for her to take. Most of what she had bought with my money was now gone, repossessed, returned, or sold off to cover the mounting bills she hadn't been able to keep up with. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different. It was empty, sure, but it was also mine again. There was no more tension in the air, no more lies lurking in the corners of every room. It was over. As I sat in the living room that night, I couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the months of suspicion and hurt. It had all led to this: an empty house, a broken marriage, and a woman who had destroyed herself in the process. But as the quiet settled around me, I realized something else. I was free. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt a sense of peace. Camilla's collapse had been brutal, yes, but it had been necessary. It had been the price she paid for her choices, and I wasn't going to carry her burden any longer. Now, it was time to move forward, time to rebuild, to focus on the future, and to let the past fall away. The storm was over, and I had survived. After Camilla left, the house was eerily quiet. It was like the air itself had shifted, cleansed of the tension and lies that had weighed it down for so long. The house no longer felt like a battleground, filled with silent wars and unspoken betrayals. It felt like a blank slate, empty, but full of possibility. The first few days without her were strange. I'd wake up, half expecting to hear the sound of her in the kitchen or catch a glimpse of her curled up on the couch. But she was gone, and in her place was only silence. I thought I'd feel some kind of sadness, maybe even regret, but instead, I felt something else: relief. The burden of the last year had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer walking around with the heavy weight of suspicion, betrayal, and anger. I was finally free. I kept busy in those first weeks, diving headfirst into work. My company had always been my passion, my escape from the chaos of the world, and now it became my lifeline. I poured every ounce of my energy into the business, restructuring deals, expanding into new markets, and making sure the company stayed on the cutting edge. The divorce had shaken me, but it had also sharpened my focus. Without the constant distraction of Camilla's lies, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. My company thrived. New clients, new deals, and new investments started pouring in. It felt like a rebirth, not just for my business, but for me as well. The success that had once felt hollow now had meaning again. I was building something that was mine, and this time, no one could take it from me. Camilla tried reaching out a few more times after the divorce was finalized. I ignored her. There was nothing left to say. She sent me one last message, a text, short and to the point. "I'm sorry, Logan, for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." Forgive her? That wasn't going to happen, at least not in the way she wanted. I wasn't going to hold on to the anger or let it poison me, but I wasn't going to pretend that her betrayal didn't matter either. It had changed me. It had scarred me, and those scars would stay with me for the rest of my life. But forgiving her? No, that wasn't part of the plan. She had made her choices. She had lost everything. That was her penance, not mine. I moved on. Slowly, carefully, but I moved on. The months after the divorce were a period of rediscovery. I had to learn how to live for myself again, to enjoy the freedom that came with being alone. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with that freedom. It felt foreign, like trying on a new suit that didn't quite fit. But I grew into it. I started traveling again. For years, my life had been wrapped up in work and maintaining a marriage that was already unraveling. Now I had the time and the money to explore the world on my own terms. I went to places Camila had always wanted to go but never made the effort to plan. Paris, Tokyo, Santorini. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had always talked about these grand trips we would take, but now I was doing them solo, leaving her behind in the rubble of her own making. The trips gave me space to think, to heal. I would sit in quiet cafes, watching the world go by, and reflect on everything that had happened. The anger, the betrayal, the devastation. It all seemed distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that hotel room months ago and found his wife with another man. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone more certain of himself. One evening, on a beach in Santorini, I realized something profound. It wasn't just that I had survived Camilla's betrayal. It was that I had grown from it. I had become someone better, someone who understood his worth. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side intact. Not just intact, but thriving. For so long, I had been defined by my relationship with Camilla. I had built my life around our marriage, around the idea of us. When that fell apart, I thought I'd lose everything, my sense of identity, my purpose, my drive. But I hadn't. If anything, I had found myself again, and this time, there were no illusions, no false hopes about what the future might hold. Just clarity. I sat there, watching the sun set over the Aegean Sea, feeling the cool breeze on my face, and I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. A real, genuine smile. The kind of smile that comes when you know you're exactly where you're meant to be. When I returned home, the house no longer felt empty. It felt like my home. I made changes, big ones. I sold the old furniture, repainted the walls, and redesigned the entire place. Camilla's touch was gone from every corner, replaced by my own. It was a reflection of who I was now, not who I had been. I also started reconnecting with people I had lost touch with over the years, friends, family, even old colleagues. For so long, I had been isolated, wrapped up in the drama of my marriage, and now I was ready to open my life up again. I hosted dinners, invited friends over, and began rebuilding the relationships that had fallen by the wayside. One of those friends, an old college buddy, introduced me to someone new. Her name was Emily, and she was nothing like Camilla. She was kind, intelligent, and most importantly, honest. There was no pretense with her, no hidden agendas. We started slow, just a few dates here and there, nothing too serious. I wasn't ready to jump into anything deep, not yet. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore either. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could trust someone again. It wasn't about filling the void that Camilla had left. It was about building something new, something real. Months passed and life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. I still had moments where the past would creep in, where the memories of what had happened would resurface, but they didn't haunt me like they used to. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far I'd come. I was stronger now, more resilient, and though the scars of Camilla's betrayal would always be with me, they didn't define me. They were just a part of my story, a chapter that had closed. As I sat in my office one evening, overlooking the city skyline, I thought about the future. The company was booming, my personal life was stable, And for the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the what-ifs or the could-have-beens. I had let go of the past. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, stronger than before. Camilla had been my greatest betrayal, but she had also been my greatest lesson. I had learned that no matter how deep the wounds, no matter how painful the fall, you could always rise again, stronger, wiser, and with a hell of a lot more clarity. I poured myself a glass of scotch, leaned back in my chair, and watched as the city lights twinkled in the distance. I had made it through the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the calm. The rebirth was complete.